Listen, if you buy a Sega Saturn before September 30th, you get 3 free games! That's a $150 value!
Dr. Forrest, dial 118, please.
Sega!
Saturn!
Anyone else get the sense that Sega's marketing team at the time were, doing the good stuff? Anyway, so one of the reasons as to why the Sega Saturn flopped in America so hard was because it didn't have a dedicated Sonic game to push. And that's sound logic because every good console needs a system seller. But it's funny that there never was a proper Sonic game on the console because Sega would have so many studios trying to fill the Blue Blur shoes. Even Sonic Team at the time were trying to make something different as opposed to just another Sonic game. The first game to come out to try and take Sonic's place was a little 2D platformer called Clockwork Knight. It was the earliest platformer on the console. And though it definitely didn't leave a splash at the time because, it was a 2D game in the era of 3D, the game has gone on to develop something of a cult following, especially among collectors of the Sega Saturn. In the game, you take the role of a wind-up soldier by the name of Pepper as he sets out on a quest through a house in order to rescue his love, a clockwork fairy from a cuckoo clock, from an unseen force. And it's actually very important that he does this because it's that fairy's voice that brings all the toys in the game to life. So if Pepper can't rescue her, they're basically going to lose their sentience forever. So when I was fixing to play Clockwork Knight, I had a feeling it would just be sort of a rip-off of Toy Story, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that it had its own flavor. So there is some lore, there is some character, and there actually are some story beats in the game. At least if you're playing the Japanese version. For whatever reason, a lot of the flavor text and dialogue was cut out of the American release. And I'm not even sure why they did that, because this was around the time when story was starting to become a pretty big component in gaming. But for whatever reason, they just decided to get rid of it. And as for the graphics, I actually think they are pretty good. It uses a combination of 2D sprites and pre-rendered sprites and 3D graphics. And for the most part, I think it's done well. Thanks to the Saturn's capabilities with 2D graphics, the pre-rendered sprites were able to be more fluidly rendered and animated than ever before. And it's to the point where at times when I was looking at Pepper, I couldn't really decide if I was looking at a 3D model or a pre-rendered sprite. And that's good because it allows the characters to blend in better with the 3D backgrounds. So the game definitely has it going for itself in regards to the technical aspects of the graphics. But I wouldn't say the same thing for the general art style. The characters in this game can be downright creepy when you're looking at them up close, especially in the pre-rendered cutscenes. Like, if you ever looked at early concept art for, the Toy Story characters, they tended to look really creepy, and that's because, the characters were obviously inspired by toys, and toys always have this frozen look on their face, and they look human, but they don't look completely human, and that sort of creates what we call the uncanny valley. There's a reason that Pixar put so much time into the look of the characters so that they look like toys, but at the same time, they're pleasant to look at. So whenever the toys have to go back to their default facial expression for, when they have to be toys for humans, it doesn't look creepy at all, unless they want it to look creepy. Like, there's a lot of work that goes into character designs like that. The characters in Clockwork Knight look like those early character designs in Toy Story, and that's to the game's detriment. The music is pretty good, though. It's bouncy, it's lively, it's jazzy. It fits the toy aesthetic of the game pretty well. As for the gameplay, it's a pretty straightforward 2D platformer. Controls just fine, the level design is decent, and it is fun to play. Though I wouldn't call it an exceptional 2D platformer either. The controls can be a little weird. Like the play control for starters, like when you jump into the air, usually when you let off the D-pad while you're in the air, your character just falls straight down. But in this game, if you were jumping forward and you let off the D-pad, you continue to move forward. So you have to remember to push back on the D-pad in order to cancel that momentum out, which can take some adjusting to. And there are some annoyances with the controls in general. For example, in order to run, you have to double tap the D-pad, which I find to be ludicrous because look at the Saturn control. There are 6 buttons right here in addition to 2 shoulder buttons. Could you not, have like a run button like right here so you can go onto the jump button there, or just have one of the shoulder buttons, for crying out loud? And that's something that is common with a lot of Saturn games. Like, I don't know why they didn't use more of the buttons on the control. Regardless of how good you think Clockwork Knight is, I think it's just okay in general. It probably was a big seller for the time, being a launch game and all, so there was a sequel to the game, Clockwork Knight 2. Though, as you can tell by looking at the game, it was really just more of the same. Which is probably why later on in Japan they would release the 2 games together as just one big game. After that, the Clockwork Knight series wouldn't live on past the Sega Saturn, which is a little disappointing because I feel like if they had taken a little more time to get the art style right, they probably could have made a decent 3D platformer out of it. I mean, I don't know what it is about toy-sized characters, but it usually makes for really good level design, and we saw something of what it could have been with the video game version of Toy Story 2. But that's probably never going to happen, and really, A Clockwork Knight is only popular amongst Sega Saturn enthusiasts. It's become something of a cult classic amongst collectors, but hasn't garnered much attention outside of that. I really only recommend it for people who are exploring the Saturn's console. Anyway, that does for Clockwork Knight, guys. Join me tomorrow as we take a look at the next game on the list.